Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the organizers of the conference to invite me here to give this talk. As a relative newcomer to Chile, Lundin Mining, I thought it would be probably of interest to you if I gave you an example of a successful exploration program or elements of it from one of our mines in Neves-Corvo in Portugal, where we've been exploring for several years now, about eight years now. It'll give you maybe a perspective on how we develop a strategy and behind an exploration program. Since we are a newcomer, I'll give you a brief overview of Lundin Mining Corporation, who we are, where we are. I'll get into describe in a reasonable detail the discovery history of Neves-Corvo itself, and then talk about the period from 2007 onwards when Lundin acquired the deposit or the mine. And then really it's all leading towards what I think we learned from the exercise and some of the key elements of that success. The typical forward-looking information for any prospective investors out there. Okay, so Lundin Mining is a mid-tier base metal mining company with diversified assets in Chile with our acquisition of Candelaria late last year. Eagle in Michigan, US, nickel copper underground mines just started in production, very high grade. Zinkgruvan in Sweden, zinc-lead silver underground mine that's been in continuous operation for 158 years now. Neves-Corvo, which I'll talk about here, copper zinc mine, used to also produce a lot of tin when it first started in Portugal. Agua Blanca, an open pit going to underground nickel copper mine in southern Spain. And we also have a 24% interest in a partnership with Freeport and Gécamines, the Congolese state mining organization, on the Tenke Fungurume copper cobalt mine in Congo, as well as the cobalt refining business in Finland. This comes from a corporate presentation you can find on our website in terms of our revenue breakdown by mines. On the left, you can see about 2/3 of our revenues come from our latest acquisitions, Eagle and of course Candelaria. On the right is our revenue breakdown is about 2/3 coming from copper. So we've been working hard at diversifying our portfolio, but focusing on copper and focusing on getting into stable jurisdictions. I can't think of a more stable jurisdiction for copper than Chile. So just 2015 outlook. The table there gives you some of the guidance we've been giving to the market there. We estimate that this year we'll be producing about 275 to 77,000 tons of copper, 35,000 tons of nickel, principally from Eagle, 150,000 tons of zinc from Neves-Corvo and Zinkgruvan, and 38,000 tons of lead. On the right column there, you can see our C1 cash costs. We're first, second quartile producer compared to our peers. So even in these drastic metal price or challenged metal price days, all of our mines enjoy good profits, and it's in part because of our focus on high-grade, profitable, high-margin operations. So on to Neves-Corvo, it's located in southern Portugal, you see there. It's in, Portugal's a mining-friendly EU country, very stable. There's excellent infrastructure. We've got a rail from the mine to transport our concentrate off to Setúbal, where we've the port there, where we've got a loading facility. Skilled, stable workforce, and I shouldn't say that here in Chile, but it's got some pretty good wine as well. So Neves-Corvo, the interesting thing, special thing about Neves-Corvo, it's geologically it's a volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit or clusters of deposits. What makes it special is really a couple of things. This is an old report now, or an old study now, but it's based on 65 copper development projects. It's different copper deposit types, as you can see. In the brown circle there, that's essentially the VMS deposits that Neves-Corvo is a type of, but it obviously has far more contained copper than your average VMS deposit. In terms of, in comparison to porphyry deposits, the pinky purple group there, it's got about as much contained copper as a medium-sized porphyry copper deposit, but it's significantly higher grade. When Neves-Corvo first went into production, the head grades were 10% copper. After nearly 20 years of mining, when we acquired it in late 2006, it was about 4% head grades. And now we're looking just under 3%, so it's still a pretty high-grade mine. It's a good asset. So what does it consist of? Really simply, the big brown blobs there, it's a cluster of very large massive sulfide bodies. You see the scale there, it's kilometers in size, this cluster. Most of the massive sulfides is pyrite. That's why they call it the pyrite belt, within which you get concentrations of copper and zinc. So a lot of the exploration is actually going on within massive pyrite. I tend to think of it as like massive limestone. It's not much use to you just to explore pyrite. I'll just name off the actual lenses here. It's important for this talk, the discovery part of it. So there's the Neves and the Corvo, the first two lenses found there. Maybe I'll point to them. So there's Neves, there's Corvo, there's Zambogel, there's Gracia, and then the very largest one, Lombador, which dips off and is open to the north there, which was found a bit later. And I'll be talking about the discovery made in 2010 of Semblana. In the table there, you see this is the latest disclosed in the last year 2P reserves. You see we've got lots of reserves, copper and zinc. M&I, total inferred resources, if you will, there's about 80 million tons of copper resources and about 115 million tons of zinc resources. So even after all of these years, there's a lot you can add to this deposit. A lot of those resources has come through the last 8 years of our continuous exploration that we've sustained here. Very briefly on the regional geology, Neves-Corvo, located here in Portugal, is part of what's known as the Iberian Pyrite Belt, about a 200-kilometer long lower Carboniferous belt that stretches from Portugal over into Spain. You see the red dots here. These are known sulfide deposits, mines, and you see on the Spanish side there's many, many more red dots than on the Portuguese side. In part, that's because the light blue-gray color here is the main hanging wall cover sequence. So you have much more exposure, outcrops, and a history of mining on the Spanish side than you do on the Portuguese side. That allows for you could say it allows for greater exploration potential here, but it also makes it much more challenging to find things undercover on the Portuguese side. So a bit on the discovery history of Neves-Corvo. In the early 70s, a consortium was put together to explore the pyrite belts on the Portuguese side. And this is just sort of stitched together some of the very first two ground gravity surveys. Gravity was used, it was an early effective targeting tool. And as you see, what came out of the very first gravity results here, you see actually bumps on Neves and what are later known to be Neves, Corvo, Gracia, and Zambogel. So the cluster was actually seen early on in the results of the gravity survey. So out of 15 gravity anomalies that were picked out, the top-ranked anomalies was coincident with Neves here. So they modeled the anomaly about 8 meters depth, and they drilled an angle hole that I'll show you. Planned it for 180 meters. So hole N1 was drilled to a final depth of 244 meters, well past the target depth, and they didn't intersect any sulfides. In fact, they just intersected what looked like an inverted sequence of rocks ending up in hanging wall cover rock. So they did a lot of head scratching, and they walked away from it at that point, not really understanding what they're up against. But the end of the hole was basically about 100 meters above or shy of the actual ore body. So these are sections here. But what happened next is they went on and they did a period of a few years of regional work. And following up on Kevin's comments, a lot of that was really good regional mapping, putting together a geological understanding. Because without that, they would never have found Neves-Corvo afterwards, as I'll get to. And what they really learned was an improved geological understanding, which led to a better, let's say, interpretation of that gravimetric model, right? And in particular, to do with the regional thrust and folding, as you see here. So there's N1, the hole that was drilled. Now, they went back, and with this understanding, and they created a rock density model based on the geology and samples taken from the surface in the drill hole. And that's the rock density model that they created. Now, the dash line in this section here, right, is that theoretical rock density model. The solid line here is the actual gravity field measurements. And so the hashed area in between is an excess mass. It can't be explained by the results of that hole, right? So with enough pounding on the desk of the geophysicists and the geologists who were pretty confident of the geology at that point said, we need to drill a deeper hole. And that's exactly what they did. And the second hole drilled here, deeper, hit the Neves ore body, just a little bit below that. 53 meters of massive sulfides, that was discovered in '77. And then very quickly afterwards, they tagged into Corvo, Gracias, Zambigel, the cluster immediately around it. And off they went. Subsequently, we got into, here's the beginning of production in end of 1988. This is cumulative, this is basically tons of copper here, and this over here says 1988 through to 2005, just before Lundin acquired the asset. In gray here is the cumulative production between those years. Red is essentially what is remaining from that original 88 resource, so you see it dwindling off. So over a period of about 17, 18 years, they actually added, not a lot of resources to that. Hard to blame them when you have a lot of reserves to start with at 10% copper, going into a period of very low metal prices as well. They basically were just mining here. So in fact, they probably lost a lot of the original understanding, although they built a very, very good geological model at the mine, but in terms of exploration capacity or exploration know-how. So when Lundin Mining came in, we did the deal October 2006 to acquire Neves-Corvo. What we also inherited besides the mine, though, and that was my problem, was 4 very large exploration programs were ongoing there, right, including the near mine exploration in Neves-Corvo. But the one I'll focus in on was this regional exploration program across the Portuguese side of the Pyrite Belt. In yellow, you see our regional exploration licenses. We literally inherited almost complete cover, like 90% coverage of the Portuguese side of the Pyrite Belt. It may sound like a good thing, but it's in fact not, because it was an enormous distraction. So we had the clock ticking on this tenement reduction, right, that we had to deal with. So that was, in addition to some of the mine exploration, that was a real focus for us. Particularly regionally, when you step away from known sulfides in a place with lots of cover and lots of structure, when you're dealing with blind targets, it's really challenging exploration. So, you got complex structural geology. There's a lot of thrusting I mentioned. So the surface geology, not very often does it match what you're seeing in the subsurface. Geochemistry, then, of course, is limited application from surface as well. You can't drill everywhere, right? So you need some, some targeting tools. Now, there was 30 years of exploration, but it was, focused in the upper 500 meters, so it's really deep exploration, right? And, the economic mineralization really, you needed good targeting tools, and there really wasn't good targeting tools. There were some, that were useful. So it was essentially a real challenge that we walked into as soon as you went to look for something, half a kilometer away from the mine. So our approach was with all of that historic data. What we did was obviously we stitched it together, standardized it, put it in a format that you could visualize it, right? And that's probably the most useful part of that first stage in there. And then learn from the previous exploration efforts what worked, what didn't work, what was missing, and what could we do, what did we need to do differently. And so the two things we focused in on were improved targeting and improved testing. We worked on the gravity, since it was essentially one of the tools that led to the original discovery of Neves-Corvo. We worked very, very hard on EM in conjunction with the geological model that we basically had created at the mine. Now, why EM? Because in terms of targeting drill holes, that coupled with a very good understanding of geology was really where we had the most confidence of targeting holes. We did bring in a new method, reflection seismic, and I'll go into a bit more detail on that. Initially, we were looking at it as a direct detection tool, and I'll show you it had some applications there. But it is a very useful tool when applied in a context of trying to figure out what the structural architecture is to help you build a better geological model from which you can then understand what the results are of your drilling. And we did a bit of that in Ireland, where structure is really important, and we're also doing it at Eagle as well, which is very deep exploration, and picking out dikes and structures is important. As I mentioned, drilling and able to test the actual target, we worked really hard on that, right? You can do all the targeting you want and put together great maps and everything else, but if you can't hit your target, and you don't even know if you've hit your target, right, it's just a waste of money, right? So we worked very much on better drill performance, accuracy, and precision. I'll get to a bit of that later. So just examples, here's an EM section. Here's actually a couple of the sulfide deposits there, some of the Lombador deposit on this section, all the drill holes from the mine. And then, as you see here, right, this is all depth that goes down to 1.5 kilometers depth. But with a geologic model and the ability to see through conductive sediments above, we were able to see the target stratigraphy come down to quite a depth there. So that gave us a lot of confidence that the massive sulfides here that was left after all those years of no exploration, that there was a good chance that they continued at depth there. Here is the reason that we started looking at seismic, because there was a research program, government-funded research program that did a line over the deposit, the big Lombador deposit, and even though it was 1996, it was pretty crude, kind of oil patch seismic surveying. You can clearly see the large massive sulfide Lombador, and there in red is draped over top is the massive sulfide. So that was one of the reasons we said, well, I wonder what else it'll pick up for us, including structures. So as I mentioned, 3D visualization is really important to build a 3D geologic model and then integrate all the other, or just the information that you want. So you want to be able to visualize the important things and get certain aspects to pop out at you that you think as a geologist are interesting and fit and is a good drill target. So in red are the massive sulfide ore bodies. You see some of the EM sections here, and you see yellow, it's corresponding with the sulfides, and there it's going down dip, right? And what we did is put on in this view here, the gray are areas of unexplained excess mass from residual gravity. And you see there is a large area in an area of no drilling that came off the Corvo deposit going at depth there, and that's where the discovery was made. So what we did, we said, well, that's a really interesting place to go poke a few holes. So there's Corvo, and we basically went down down plunge of Corvo to the east here. First hole, sort of 700 meter spaced holes. The first hole hit some anomalous geochemistry. The second hole, again, it picked up a bit of an off-hole anomaly there. And the third hole, very strong off-hole anomaly, target stratigraphy. We can identify the rocks. We knew that we were close to something. It was just a matter of grade then. So the next hole, the fourth hole, plugged into Semblana itself, which turned out to be greater than 50 million tons of massive sulfides. There's an initial resource out there. There's more potential. It's about 1 kilometer away, so it's not going to affect the immediate mine plan. So we went kind of back in to explore and sort of add closer into the mine. But I thought I'd give you a history of that, because I think it's it was a pretty good integrated approach to making it a near mine discovery there. We then did just after that, or the summer that the discovery was made, we did the seismic survey, and you see there in blue is a very strong seismic reflector that corresponds very closely with a massive sulfide body, just like it did with the Lombador deposit here, right? What came out of that survey is that plus geology, EM and other things, we started drilling some of the reflectors and found another deposit to the south of there. Here you see a horizontal slice through this 3D seismic model at about 900 meters. Clear as day is the Lombador deposit dipping off to the north, and the almost flat Semblana deposit there as well. So here it's a direct detection tool, but not everywhere. Improve performance in drilling. Very quickly, we inherited 3 contractors, 6 rigs. The drilling was unacceptable, unwanted deviation, breakdowns, performance, all those sort of issues. So we decided we need to choose one contractor, work with them, and go forward. And that's essentially what we did. And we brought in Devico for deviation drilling. It's an added cost, but we were able to hit our target, and we can do it within 3 meters of where we plan every time at greater than 1,000 meter hole depths. This is one of the metrics that we found very useful in comparing and ultimately choosing contractors, what we call drill efficiency, which is basically meters drilled per month over the unit cost in there, right? So basically, the bigger the number, the better. You want more meters at lower cost. It's not just about cost, right? You want both of them in there. So just to summarize here, here's what we learned out of it. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the major ones that I think are important here is, as Jack mentioned earlier on this morning, define exploration objective. You got to know what it is that you've got to define what it is before you start looking for it, or you're just going to keep exploring and wasting shareholders' money, frankly. All right, so you know what to deliver, and particularly in a mine site, you need to know when to deliver it as well. Right? Don't forget what worked in the past, as you've seen with looking at gravity, trying to geologically understand why there's an excess mass of gravity there, right? And minimize your distractions. Focus on your best asset. If you inherit or you got a big land position, reduce it as fast as you can and focus on what the rocks are really trying to tell you where the metal is, right? In the case of Portugal here, that regional program probably added 2 years to the discovery history or discovery timeline for Semblana. Choosing not to add a regional exploration program at our Eagle deposit that we acquired a little over about 2 years ago has certainly contributed to an earlier discovery. So we are trying to learn in this whole process here. Finally, go after mineable resource assets. The market won't value you for too much for finding resource assets that won't be mined in your lifetime. And just to leave you with this slide here, this is copper resources, the evolution of them from 1988 through to 2013. All right, so these are tons of copper resources. As you see here, here's that long period of production, right, and not really adding much there. The black line is meters drilled. We came in about here, right, as the resource base was heading down. And this is essentially what we've added in there. Semblana is a small part of that. Most of this is pretty boring resource addition, but I tell you, it creates value and shareholders really appreciate it. Thanks.